headed west. Our family has slowly moved west, settling down for a period of years, scratching a living out of the land where they were, meeting people, falling in love, getting married, and having children, growing old, dying, and the next generation to continue on west, till finally I'm the first one that made it west as far as you can go. I went clear to the Pacific Ocean, even working on a fishing boat out on the Pacific Ocean. In the next half hour or so, we'll try to see a few of the high points of this journey west as the Ray family has moved on. And one thing I can say, the Ray family always had a good time on their way west. P.E. Ashford was my grandmother's dad. He was on the north in the war between the states, while on the Ray side, some of the people were on the north and some on the south. There must have been interesting conversations at the dinner table over slavery. I have his handwritten records, which he had given to my grandma, and my grandma passed them on to me.
This is a list of the members of Company C of the 11th Iowa Infantry in their camp near Washington, D.C. on May 31st of 1865. Captain M.W. Clark, at age 31, was taken prisoner on the 18th of February in 1865. William Ashford was wounded at Yazoo City on May 5th, 1864. P.E. Ashford was wounded slightly on July 22nd, 1864. P.E. Ashford would have been my great-great-grandfather, and their brother, Jacob Ashford, enlisted on May 4th, 1864, at the age of 19. Over half of the soldiers were either taken prisoner or wounded.
And it seems to mention nothing about any of them dying. I don't know whether they just didn't mention this or whether it didn't happen.
A list of all the places of importance passed by the 11th Iowa Infantry from May 1st, 1864 to May 31st, 1865. Sherman immediately followed and captured his entire army at Greensboro, North Carolina, thus ending another campaign of near 600 miles. Left Raleigh on the 19th day of April for Richmond, Virginia, and arrived at Richmond on the 12th of May, and leaving Richmond proceeded to Washington, and arrived and had grand review by the identification of the U.S. and General Grant and Sherman, and marched out to Georgetown and went into camp to defrost to their homes, thus ending another campaign of 285 miles. May 1st, 1864 to May 31st, 1865, 2,285 through an enemy's country and arrived at the capital and passed in review on the 24th of May. Thus, in 1 year and 1 month, the Army marched 2,285 miles and was in battles and skirmishes too numerous to mention. By Perseus E. Ashford. On March 24th, they were in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And on April 14th, they were in Raleigh, North Carolina. They crossed the Neuse River. On April 15th, they were in Page Station, North Carolina. On April 19th, they were again in...
Okay.
On May 3rd, they were in Ridgeway, North Carolina. They crossed the Roanoke River. On May 8th, they were in Petersburg, Virginia. On May 10th, they were in Manchester, Virginia. On May 12th, they were in Richmond, Virginia, across the James River. On May 19th, they were in Alexandria, Virginia. On May 24th, they were in Washington, D.C., across the Potomac River. And on May 25th, they were in Georgetown.
My great-grandpa was an officer and a member of the American Legion. And I have his little American Legion book here. It says The Grand Army of the Republic, Maryville, Missouri. As time went on, we have a pretty decent record of photographs of P.E. Ashford, as he sent these pictures to my grandma on somewhat of a regular basis. This one, it said, was taken in Chicago. He looks as though time was taking a toll on him at this time, and throughout his life he always had problems with his old wounds, where he said he was wounded slightly, but being slightly was probably through the stomach or someplace like this, because on cold days it bothered him worse than others. The picture of him here was taken on his property on a lake in Michigan where he lived. He was a taxidermist at this time, from what He had at least 2 daughters, one of them my grandma, which I don't have a young picture of her, and then the other's my grandma's sister. My grandma says her sister was 14 the last time she saw her, when she left and married my grandpa. And I remember when my grandma died, we were getting her mail, and in the mailbox right after my grandma died was a letter from her sister, and her sister said, "I want to come see you this spring." She was living in Michigan at the time, and she said, "My legs just won't carry me now, but maybe by spring I'll be stronger and can come see you." But it was already... My grandma never mentioned her mother, so I knew nothing about her mother. And going through the records, I can see a funeral receipt here to P.E. Ashford with a funeral costs that were, I think it was $46. The most expensive thing was the burial case here, which we would call a coffin nowadays. And we're assuming that this was my great grandma's burial in Denver, Colorado in 1880. And I told this small, well-worn Bible was the one that P.E. Ashford carried with him on his journey in the war between the states. P.E. Ashford had a very neat little house on a lake in Michigan, and that's where he lived out his last days.
The Ray Family Bible was published at Brattleboro, Vermont by Holbrook and Fessenden in 1828. James Ray and his wife Sally Hungate Ray brought it from Kentucky when they came to Missouri in 1845. They were living at Bardstown, Nelson County, Kentucky, where the younger members of the family were born, including Rebecca Jane Ray. They boarded a river steamboat in Louisville, Kentucky, on the Ohio River, then into the Mississippi River, and then into the Missouri River, landing at Amazonia, Missouri, which was then a river port near Savannah in St. Joseph, Missouri. The parents, James and Sally Ray, Ivan Brown and his wife, Nancy Ray Brown, and their 2 children, Sarah and Thomas, Granderson B. Ray, age 21, Thomas A. Ray, age 16, George J. Ray, age 19, Emmeline, age 13, Rebecca Jane, age 8, Jonathan, age 5. The sons, William T., born 1815, and James Jr., born 1822, had preceded the family, and that was one reason that James Ray came to Missouri. John H. Ray died in infancy. Elizabeth died in infancy. William T. Ray, born August 18, 1815. Nancy D. Ray, born January 13, 1817. Polly H. Ray, born November 10, 1819, died August 28, 1836. James L. Ray, Jr., born January 11, 1822. Granderson B. Ray, born August 28, 1824.
And Granderson B. Ray was my great-grandpa.
George J. Ray, born December 27, 1826. Thomas A. Ray, born on the 27th of March.
He's the one that migrated to Helena, Montana, and was supposedly the first one that ever built a log cabin where Helena, Montana stands.
1829. Emmeline D. Ray, born 4th of January, 1832. Sarah Ann Ray, born December 28, 1834, died September 14, 1839. Rebecca Jane Ray, born Sunday, November 26, 1837. Jonathan J. Ray, born May 12, 1840.
The old tin type stood the test of time quite well. I have some of the old pots that was used by the Ray family to cook in the fireplaces, possibly the fireplaces that my great-great-great-grandpa built. And this one is made of cast iron, and the one alongside it is made of copper. It was similar to what the Hudson's Bay Company used to trade to the Indians. The old sewing machine here was brought by the Ray family from Kentucky, and also my great-great-grandparents brought slaves with them from Kentucky, and after Lincoln freed the slaves, they stayed with the family and they were paid at that time, and the house slave lady sewed all their clothes with this old sewing machine. And I don't know whether that was after she was freed or when. I'm not sure of the date, and I haven't really found when this sewing machine was made, but it's one of the very earliest of sewing machines, and it looks as though it would still work. The pitman is loose and the belt is gone, but other than that, it seems to turn freely and probably still Grandpa's brother Benjamin, at a quite young age, taking at a photographer's place in Maryville, Missouri.
Let me show you. Or if you use it, if you go like.
My great-great aunt
I got that with my.
Mary Graham. The Rays said there was no Indian blood in their family, but I've taken this to someone that knew Indians that was high up in an Indian tribe, and they said that isn't true, that she is definitely part Indian. My grandmother's sister, Eva. My grandpa's closing out sale. It was Thursday, October 7th, 1907, when he sold out in Maryville, Missouri, and moved to a homestead in the prairies of Wyoming. Grandpa Ray apparently had a sense of adventure and moved around quite a little bit. This is where he's going to Wyoming in this old car to look about a homestead out in the prairies of Wyoming. They called it the Golden Prairies. And my grandpa is the one in the back. I just wonder how many hills they had to push this old car up, and how many flat tires, and how many breakdowns it had. But there's no information on that. Heading for the windswept, short grass plains of Wyoming, all harnessed up and loaded and ready to go. My grandpa Charles W. Ray, all dressed up in a suit on the homestead in Wyoming. A buffalo's plenty big and strong. Why not put 'em to work, hook 'em to a wagon, and have 'em pull a wagon down the streets of Pine Bluffs, Wyoming. My grandpa's brother Benjamin Ray in his homestead in Wyoming. The house is what they call a dugout, half below and half above ground. And note the old rifle standing alongside him. Pine Bluffs, Wyoming, as it looked in 1907. My grandpa is the one in the wagon. They're driving their cattle into Pine Bluffs to put on a railroad, and they'll send them to Omaha for market. And my grandpa will go with them to see that he gets a fair price for them. My grandparents' old homestead house near Pine Bluffs, Wyoming. It looked to be a much better homestead house than many were. Margaret and a good horse in Wyoming in 1910. My grandpa and grandma Ray in a buggy in Wyoming. My aunts Margaret and Virginia sitting on the fender of an old car. My dad out in front of the old homestead house in Wyoming, and it looks as though the winds of Wyoming are taking a toll on the paint on the house. It's beginning to need paint by now. The old cement school where my dad and most all his brothers and sisters went to school. Going to Cheyenne. Cutting a little grain with the old binders and horses. And sleds for the winter time. Cutting some grain with what they called a header. This just took the head off the grain and put it in a box, and then these heads were stacked for thrashing later. After the grain came out of the binder, then it was shocked to dry for thrashing later. After the grain has stood in the shock for a long enough period of time to dry, then it is thrashed in one of these old thrashing machines. Pine Bluffs, Wyoming. The old post office and store at Pine Bluffs, Wyoming, about 1910. My dad's brothers and sisters in 1910. It's Virginia, Charles, and Margaret. Margaret, Virginia, and Charlie again. Earl, James, and Charlie with some fantastic potatoes. Charlie is the one sitting on the ground. My Uncle Charlie, standing at attention. A half-decent rattlesnake taken near a windmill. In 1911, my dad, Donald Ray, was born, the youngest of all the Ray children. My dad in 1913, this must mean he was about 2 years old, standing out by their wood pile. Looks like juniper wood from the bluffs. My dad standing outside the old homestead house with a really good dog. My dad all dressed up for a picture. And a good sheep never hurt anything too. My dad sitting on a fence with plenty of lingering Wyoming snow still drifted on the ground. My dad riding his pony Tonka. My dad topping off his pet pig, and it looks like the little piglet's running alongside. Looks as if you have a good dog and a good horse, you've got it made, and apparently that's what my dad thinks in this picture. My dad's oldest sister's girl, Mildred, standing with my dad. Earl, all dressed up in the suit. Earl was the oldest of my dad's brothers. Jim, Paul, and Earl digging some more big potatoes a few years later. My grandpa's brother's son, Theodore, and his wife. My Uncle Paul. My Aunt Bess, her husband George, and Mildred as a baby. My Uncle Jim and his wife, a Wyoming school teacher named Lois. My Uncle Jim and Lois again. My grandmother, Minnie Ray, standing outside an old car in Wyoming. Margaret and Betty Jane. My cousin. My dad's sister Margaret at 17 years old. My Aunt Margaret at 19 years old. My dad as he grows up on the homestead in Wyoming. And it's time to learn how to shoot a gun as my dad marches off with a gun. My dad and his cousin Mildred again. My dad is handling this porcupine he shot quite carefully. My dad is the little guy looking over the sheep. Sydney is the one with the Navy uniform on. Sydney was Virginia, one of Dad's older sisters, boyfriends, and Charlie stands back there flexing his muscle.